Have a blessed day. It's a good day to start new things. I am your pre-service teacher, Miss Realisa Damasin, and I am your guide in teaching and learning Mathematics 9. Before we start, I want you to get your module, pencil and ball pen, and make sure you will stay in a place that are free from any distraction. Let's begin. And now guys, we will discuss about ratio and proportion. At the end of this video, we will define ratio and proportion, enumerate properties of proportion, solve problems involving ratio and proportion. So let's start. What do we mean by ratio? When we say ratio, this is the comparison between two numbers or quantities with the same units. So this is where we compare two numbers or categories or quantities. Let's say I have here triangles and squares. How are we going to write the ratio of triangles to squares? So as you can see, I have here two triangles and three squares. So how are we going to write the ratio of triangles to squares? So in writing the ratio, it can be expressed in four ways. And it can be written as 2 is to 3. This is the colon form. Another way is you can write it as division form. Another way is phrase form or the word form. And also in fraction form. Okay, this is 2 is to 3. 2 is to 3. 2 is to 3. This is read as 2 is to 3. So we have four ways. We have the colon form, division form, phrase form, and fraction form. So let's have an example. So express the following ratios in simplest form. Number 1. I have here 1 hour to 40 minutes. So 1 hour to 40 minutes, we will not put 1 over 40 or 1 is to 40. It is not. Because this is 1 hour and here is minutes. They must have in the same units. So 1 hour to 40 minutes. And what is the equivalent of 1 hour to minutes? So this is 60 minutes. Therefore, 60 is to 40. Alright? So for us to get the simplest form, we will divide it both numerator and denominator by the GCF or the greatest common factor. So what is the greatest common factor? We have 20. So 60 divided by 20, that is 3. And 40 divided by 20, we have 2. Therefore, the simplest form of the given ratio is 3 over 2 or 3 is to 2. You have to convert first weeks to days. So 2 weeks is equivalent to 14 days. And 4 days is also 4. So 14 is to 4. So for us to get the simplest form, we will divide it by the GCF, that is 2. So 14 divided by 2, that is 7. And 4 divided by 2, that is 2. Next, 8 out of 30 passengers are tourists. Find the ratio of the tourists to the other passengers. So out of 30, there are 8 passengers. How are we going to get the numbers of the other passengers? So we will put 30 minus 8, your tourist, is equal to 22. Therefore, we have 22 other passengers who are not tourists. So 30, the total number of passengers, minus 8, the number of tourists, is equal to 22, which is your other passenger. So find the ratio of the tourist if your tourist is 8. So is 8 is to the other passengers, which is 22. So we have 8 is to 22. To get the simplest form, we will divide it by the GCF, which is 2. So, 8 divided 2, that is 4. And 22 divided by 2, that is 11. You may write this in column form, 4 is to 11. Now, let's talk about proportion. So, a proportion is an equation that shows two ratios are equal. So, if we have two ratios, like the given example, if we have two ratios and they are equal, then we can consider that as proportion. How do we write a proportion? It can be written as A is to B as C is to D, or A over B is equal to C over D. So, it can be in column form or also in fraction form. You may read this as A is to B as C is to D, or A over B is equal to C over D. Let's have an example. So let us give the ratio of triangles to squares. Let us count. So we have 2 is to 3, while this one we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 triangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 squares, so 4 is to 6. So how can we show the proportion here? If these two ratios are equal, then we can call it proportion. So again, if these two ratios are equal, then we can call it a proportion. How can we check that this 2 is to 3 is equal to 4 is to 6? So let's check. So these quantities, for each quantities, the A, B, C, and D, they are what we call terms. So this B and C, this is what we call the means, while the A and D are the extremes. So 3 and 4 are means, and 2 and 6 are the extremes. This is the parts of the proportion. This is your terms, 2, 3, 4, and 6. 3 and 4, this is your means. 2 and 6, this is also your extremes. How can we check that these two ratios are true and it is proportion? Now, let us multiply the means. 3 times 4, this is 12. And 2 times 6 is also 12. So as you can see, the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes. Or you may use the cross multiplication. We will multiply 2 and 6, this is 12. And multiply the means, this is also 12. So as you can see, the product of the extreme is equal to the product of the means. If you look at the product of the means and extremes, so their product is equal. The product of the extreme is equal to the product of the means, that is A times D is equal to B times C. Again, the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes, then the ratio is equal, then the proportions are true. There is another way of identifying whether the ratios are equal or if they are proportion. If two ratios can be simplified into same ratio, then the two ratios form a proportion. So, example, we will get the simplified ratio of the given example. So 4 is to 6, we can get the lowest term of 4 is to 6 by dividing it by 2. So we will have 2/3. Then how about 9 is to 12? So we have 9 divided by 3, that is 3. And 12 divided by 3, that is 4. So 3/4. Then we have 8 is to 12. Divided by 4, that is 2/3. Then 10 is to 25. So 10 divided by 5. So this is 2/5. We can divide it by by getting the GCF. So given the simplified ratios of the given sets of ratios, as you can see, we have 4 over 6 is equal to 8 over 12. So 4:6 is equal to 8 over 12. Why? Because as you can see, they have the same simplified ratios or lowest term. Since they have same lowest term, we can say that 4:12 is equal to 8:12. 4:6 is equals to 8:12. So these two ratios are equal. Or you may write this in fraction form. 4 over 6 is equals to 8 over 12. How can we check? By multiplying the means and extremes. This is one way to know that they are equal, that 4:6 is proportional to 8:12. Since the answers are both 48, then the ratios are equal and the proportion is true. Now, let's talk about properties of proportion. So, this is the properties of proportion. We have the cross multiplication property, alternation property, inverse property, addition and subtraction property. So, we will explain this one by one. I have here if A over B or A is to B is equal to C is to D, where your B should not be equal to 0 and your D should not be equal to 0. So, how we will apply this to cross multiplication property? Just like we did earlier, we will cross multiply this. Then, this is A times D is equals to B times C. For alternation property, how are we going to use this? This is what it looks like. We will alternate this. So, this will become A over C is equals to B over D, where B should not be equal to 0 and C should not be equal to 0 and D and should not be equal to 0. Now, for inverse property, this is also what we call the reciprocal. So, if we have here A over B, then this means the reciprocal will be B over A is equals to D over C. And then for addition property, we will add this of what is in the denominator. So, we have A plus B over B is equals to C plus D over D. And then for the subtraction property, papalitan lang po natin ito ng minus. Okay, magsasubtract lang po tayo. So, A minus B over B is equals to C minus D over D. That's it for today, guys. I am Realisa Damasin. Now, tandaan, maging matyaga para maging matgaling. See you next time.